So to start with space. Space is all about anticipating the obstacles before they force you into a stall. It's figuring out what's holding you back and figuring out what you need to move forward. It's about having the space to do the work you need to do. It's creating that space, because like anytime someone tells you you need to do something more, like the question is, well, with what time and with what resource? Like, how do I do more without first creating space? So we're going to talk today about, well, how do I create space in my life to do all of these things that I'm now committing to myself to do because I care about the disciplined pursuit of excellence. So let's start with figuring out what's holding you back. This is all about anticipating barriers. Okay. So take your notebook and pick one of your critical contexts, one of the things that you are sort of the most, maybe it's the thing that brought you here originally, the sort of the context that you care the most about, or maybe it's the context that's in the most disarray, whatever it is. Pick one of your contexts and ask yourself, what are the barriers of your being successful in that context? What's currently holding you back or getting in the way? Spend some time writing. Now, and this is kind of hard. Like, you have to really be, because sometimes you're the barrier. And so if you need help, you can look up here. I have found there are 4 types of barriers. There's some temporal constraints, things like I don't have permission, I don't have autonomy. To do this, it requires trust. I need a guide. There's a person that's in my way, or maybe it's I need people. There's social constraints, which are things like, these are switched. Temporal constraints is time, money, tools, and physical space, and social constraints are these. So imagine those are switched. I'll fix that before I upload it. And then there's the internal constraints. These are things like, well, I need to develop, for me to do this, I need to develop skills or gain knowledge, or I need a plan, and because I don't know enough in order, to build a plan, or I need more visibility, I need to understand more about what I'm trying to do. Or it could be emotional constraints, things like, well, I'm worried about how am I going to stay motivated because I always lose steam, or maybe it feels too big, or there's a sense that this is going to take too long, or it's too unclear, whatever it is. These will kind of give you a guide if you get hung up. But take a moment and pick your critical context and really do a deep assessment of what's holding you back, or what do you anticipate getting in your way. Okay, let's pause right there and take a minute and share. We'll come back, but let's just see what people have written so far so that we sort of see. Who wants to share some of their barriers that they anticipate?
I kind of want to talk about mine, because mine's a little bit like the context is discipline. That's something that I want. That's something
you chose a characteristic as a context.
Yes.
So pause real quick, and then I want to come back. So this is what Benjamin Franklin did. He chose as he didn't call them critical contexts, but he chose for his life 13 characteristics that he wanted to be the focus of developing who he was. And so he developed these 13 characteristics, and then every week he would devote that week to evolving that context, that characteristic. So I love that, a characteristic as a context. Okay, keep going.
So for the constraints, I really had to pull from that. I'm glad you put that list up because it's like discipline has its own. I don't know. The word itself has its own barriers. Like being disciplined is hard.
It's by itself.
Or it's by itself for its own reasons. And so I was trying to really dig deeper. I was like, what does that even mean to me? And trust was the first one that popped out because I feel like being disciplined in my life is something that will actually help me be happy in the long run, help me to find my purpose in the long run, and accomplish my goals in life. I think that's a huge part. And I think there's a part of me that doesn't trust that will happen if I'm disciplined. And guide was kind of one that I was playing with. Plan as well. Visibility, because I don't know if for sure that's going to be a key factor or not. Motivation, obviously with discipline, that's a big thing. And then it is overwhelming, so I put too big. Distractions are obviously part of discipline. And then also there's some fear with it. That was kind of one that I pulled for myself. Like maybe like, what if it doesn't work? Like what if I can't be disciplined?
So are you familiar with the term macrocosm and microcosm? Anyone? Macrocosm and microcosm. So a macrocosm is a big thing. It's like, a macrocosm would be an orbit of a planet around a sun. A microcosm is an orbit of an electron around an atom. You know, it's the same thing, but there's a macrocosm, sort of the big thing, and then a microcosm, sort of a small representation of this big thing. One of the fundamental techniques used especially by sports psychologists, but also by occupational therapists, people who are trying to teach others how to develop a set of skills and competencies that will help them be differentiate themselves in the market, is that they force them to take something big and kind of ambiguous and lacking specificity, like discipline, and they say break it up into microcosms, break it up into small chunks, and perfect those things. So, an example would be a golfer. So they have a golfer, and the golfer will perfect his grip, and he'll spend, a long time just focusing on the grip, and then letting go, and then the grip. And then, a basketball player, shoot free throws, shoot free throws, shoot free throws. And then they'll shoot from over there, and then they'll shoot from over. They're not playing the game. They're just perfecting an element, an aspect. And so, especially if you have a context that is a characteristic, but in any of your contexts, one of the great ways to progress is to take something big, break it up into a bunch of small skills or smaller things to perfect, and then you focus on that, and that allows you to then put them all together when it's game time, and you have sort of developed that skill. And so the other thing that allows you to do is it allows you, when you fail, it allows you to fail small instead of failing big. Instead of waiting for the big game, and it's like, I have not practiced my three-pointer shot, for however long, and then I have to make one, and I don't make it. Like, instead of failing big, you get to fail small, where there's nothing on the line, and then it's less risky. So there's this idea of macrocosms and microcosms. I'll post some stuff about that, because that's actually a really powerful. Okay, anybody else? Anybody online want to share some of your barriers? Okay, let's take just a little bit more time and try to figure out the things that are going to hold you back. And except this time, we're going to ask a different set of questions. What you'll want to do is you'll want to go back. These slides will be up so you can go back and look at them. You're going to want to go back through each of your contexts. These are the orbits that you care about evolving. And you're going to want to say, okay, and what barriers can I anticipate? Because, you know, a rock climber doesn't show up on the day of a big climb having never inspected the mountain. You know, they know beforehand what's the weather going to be like, how cold is it going to be, what, you know, how much chalk are they going to need, how much rope to bring. Like they know what tools to bring to the climb because they've assessed and they know where the barriers are going to be. They know where, like, what happens is we don't adequately anticipate the things that are going to stand in our way in our journey towards our objective. And then we start to go on our objective and something gets in our way and it stops us. And we stop dead in our tracks. And then we fail to move forward because we failed to plan for obstacles that we could have easily anticipated would be there. So the idea is the best plans are those that adequately anticipate the barriers that will stand in your way. The best plans are those that will adequately anticipate the barriers that will stand in your way. So anyone who is committed to a disciplined pursuit of excellence in their critical context is going to take the time and think about what's going to hold them back, what's going to get in their way, and they're going to add to their plan ways around those things. And if you need help on any of that, where you're like, okay, here's my critical context and here's my barrier, I'm not sure how to translate that into my plan, let me know. And I would love to help. So now, on anticipating barriers, let's ask a different set of questions. If I were to just ask you, what's holding you back? Like, why aren't you just going right now? Like, why haven't you already begun? Or if you had begun, why aren't you further along? Ask yourself those questions and see if you come up with different answers. These can be really hard questions. Right? Mm-hmm. It can be hard questions. These are the types of questions where you really have to be honest with yourself. Anybody want to share? Be really bold and vulnerable and share what's holding you back. Why haven't you already begun and why aren't you further along? These can be really tough answers. Austin, go ahead.
So for me, just again with leadership, the things that are holding me back are fear, knowledge of just how to do it, and a guide. Like, I don't know how to do it, and so I want to look to someone who inspires me to figure out a way that would be best to do it.
Yeah.
And why I haven't already begun is because I'm scared of starting, and because I have a lack of motivation. It's something that I very much want to do, and it's something that I feel called to, but it's very hard for me to just do it. And
Well, why?
it's not necessarily something that's pressing for me right now.
Mm.
I'm not in a position where I'm where I have to be helping other people.
Yeah. Are you familiar with this framework? So the framework is urgent and important. Have you ever seen this?
Yeah, I think I just finished reading The 7 Habits of Highly
Yeah.
Effective
So this is a
Teens.
Coveyism.
Uh-huh.
So there are things in our lives, there are contexts in our lives that are urgent but not important. And this tends to occupy the bulk of our time. There's things in our lives that are important but not urgent, like, oh, I'm going to develop discipline. I'm going to develop leadership skills. Those are really hard because it's really hard to allocate time to something that is not in this category because there's so much in this category. We'll talk a little bit about that. That's a really good one. You know, Nike has a phrase, which is just do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the idea that we tend to, the things that matter to us, we tend to delay and postpone and we put off because we constantly want to feel like we're more ready. And we want to feel like, okay, we're going to learn more, we're going to develop more, and so we wait and we wait and we wait way too long when in reality we would have gotten so much more experience and knowledge and evolution of our abilities if we would have just started. So what you're going to want to do is go back through all of your critical contexts, and you're going to want to do a real deep, heartfelt assessment of what are my barriers and what's holding me back. So now let's go to what will I need to get there. So there's, remember, two components. There's what is holding me back, and there's what will I need to get there. So that's where we sort of look at our objectives and we say, okay, you know, what am I going to need? What is it? Tools? Is it time? Like, is it money? What is it? So write down on your list the things that are going to be the critical assets that you need. Remember, we're just focusing on that one context that you're thinking about right now. Or you could change context if you want. But for one of your contexts, ask yourself, what are you going to need? And we're not talking what are the barest essentials. We're talking like, if you could just have whatever, if you could have everything, what is it that would help fuel your success? Within reason, obviously.
$1 billion.
That's right, $1 billion. I would be such a good leader if I had $1 billion. I would have so much discipline.
I wouldn't
Or
even
not.
have to lead it all.
That's right. I want to tell you about the all of a sudden syndrome. The all of a sudden syndrome, by the way, does anybody notice that I say all of a sudden a lot? I say now that I say it, you're gonna really notice that I say all of a sudden a lot. So there's this thing in business called the all of a sudden syndrome. Here's what happens. We tend to, you remember change blindness, right? Remember change blindness? That was the video of like the gorilla, the people passing the ball, remember? And then the gorilla comes in and you're so busy watching the passes, the ball going back and forth that you don't notice the gorilla walking into the middle and waving and then moonwalking off because you become blind to the change because you're focused on so many other things. Well, because of change blindness, we all tend to suffer from what's called the all of a sudden syndrome, which is, all of a sudden my job's on the line. All of a sudden, I'm overweight. All of a sudden I can't do X. All of a sudden my relationship is in a shambles. All of a sudden, whatever it is, we tend to only recognize something once it reaches a state of what's called the crystallization of discontent. And meanwhile, all this time, this thing has been evolving, and it's this entropy that has been happening, and it's this state of decay, but we don't recognize it. Well, all of a sudden tends to sabotage, the all of a sudden syndrome tends to sabotage our objectives and our ability to consistently and reliably move forward in life because we don't adequately anticipate what we're going to need to succeed. What are the barriers that are going to hold us back, and what are the things we need to be able to get there? And so we start on this journey like the rock climber, and he's now climbing up this rock face, and he gets to an overhang, and he's like, all of a sudden, I can't go any farther. But it didn't happen all of a sudden. He could have looked, and he could have realized that there's an overhang, and he needs a special clip and a special, I don't know, I'm not a rock climber, but whatever, special tools that allow you to do that.
Dynamite.
And it's, I don't know if dynamite's what you want to be using when you're in the, but maybe, okay, yeah, sure. So the problem that we have is we don't adequately anticipate the things that are going to stand in our way and the resources and assets and tools and the things that we're going to need in order to succeed. And so then we get on our journey, we get to a critical point, and then we stall and we fail. And we lose all of our momentum because we didn't adequately prepare and we didn't put that into our plan. So the point is simply this. The point is that you need to do if you care about this critical context, if it truly is for you a critical context, if it's something that you genuinely say, my ability to reach my purpose and be successful in my life hinges, and to stay true to my identity, whatever it is, hinges upon my ability to consistently and reliably evolve this context, then take the time to figure out what am I going to need and what do I anticipate standing in my way, and make a plan for it. It could be that you don't know what you need, in which case you go and you find someone who's done it, someone who's climbed that mountain before, and say, hey, I'm about to go climb, what's the big California, the big Yosemite. I'm about to go climb Yosemite, which, by the way, somebody did that the other day in a free climb. No ropes, no tools. I'm like, what's wrong with you? That's crazy.
My palms get sweaty watching just rock climbers who are already attached to ropes.
Who are attached to ropes. He free climbed it. It's crazy. I don't know how. It just blows my mind. By the way, because Yosemite is 500-600 feet tall? I can't remember. Or more?
It's half dome. It's insane.
It's insane.
I thought Yosemite was 14,000 feet.
Yosemite is a park.
Yeah,
There's
El Capitan.
Yeah, half.
Yeah. So anyway, you're right. Yosemite's the park.
Sorry.
Thank you for correcting that. That's really good. You're like, Yosemite is a park. Hello, come on. No, you're fine. You're right. Yosemite is the park. It's El Capitan, which is the rock face, I think, right? That is some crazy. Anyway, if you don't know what you're going to need, or if you don't have enough visibility yet to adequately anticipate the barriers, then go find someone who has climbed that rock face. Go find someone who has done it and say, okay, I am wanting to do this thing. I understand you have done it. And I want to put a plan together that will allow me to be successful. Can you help me anticipate the things that are going to stand in my way and the tools that I'm going to need so that I can make a plan for sourcing these resources, getting these tools, and I will be able to build a plan that will help me be successful. Because what you don't want to do is find yourself halfway up the rock face and you don't have the right tool. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Pretty straightforward. Okay. So now we get to maybe this is the hard part. The hard part is, you know what, in order to do the important things, we have to make space for them. Who right now can raise their hand and say, I have so much space, extra space in my life, I'm going to go do all kinds of new things? No, Sarah's like, not me. No, not me. Yeah, okay. So a lot of this comes down to our ability to say yes and our ability to say no. And sometimes this is saying yes or saying no to someone else. And sometimes this is saying yes or saying no, like, to ourselves. Okay. I want to talk about what's called by the way, if you haven't read it yet, if you didn't notice, in the workshop resources, I'm posting the links to all of the books that I reference so that you'll be able to go and check those books out. The best book on this that I have found is the one called Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. It's good, huh?
Yeah, I when you pulled this up, I was like, yeah, it's essentialism.
It's essentialism, that's right. Essentialism is the disciplined pursuit of less. It's how do we say no, diplomatically, artfully, tactfully, like how do we say no and what do we say no to? So if you really want to geek out on this, go get that book. It's phenomenal and it's really awesome. But here's what happens. So there's, in the world of product management, there's a phrase called unapologetically the suck threshold. Has anybody heard of the suck threshold? Nope? Okay, this is great. Okay, here's how the suck threshold works. There's this thought. So this is activities or features over here. And this is value. So as a product adds features, its value goes up, right? So the more a product does, the more it has, the more value it has because it's doing all the things. So there's this propensity that people have to expect that this line just goes on ad infinitum, goes on to infinity. But what they have found is that actually is not how it works. How it works is actually, so there's a point when you're building a product where this is called the suck, and it's terrible, I know. I didn't make it up. The suck threshold. So here and down, you suck because your product doesn't do enough. But what happens is there's a tipping point right around here. There's a tipping point, and now your value starts to diminish. It starts to go down until at some point you suck, not because you're not doing enough, but because you're trying to do too much. And so this is the tipping point. Apple is a good illustration. Apple is a good example of this. They have this you knew I was going to talk about Apple, didn't you? Apple is the perfect illustration of this. Apple is relentless about saying no. Microsoft is relentless about saying yes, which is why you go into so many of their apps and you're like, I can't, like, it's like, I don't, like, it's just too much. The user experience, you guys are laughing at me because I talk about this all the time at home. So, a product that tries to do too much, it starts to dilute the impact of what's there. And so there's this idea that right around here is the sort of the apex, and everything over here is what matters most. And everything over here is what you need to say no to. And it's really difficult when we look at this for our own lives, because it's in our own lives too. There's a period of time where it's like, you know what, I am not adding enough value. I need to do more. But there's also a period of time where it's like, I am trying to do so much that I'm not doing enough in the areas that matter most. My critical contexts are suffering. And there's this saying that when you try to be all things to all people, you end up being nothing to anybody. And so there's this area where it's like we have to get disciplined about recognizing, what is called the sweet spot. And when are we beyond it? Essentialism goes into a lot of details on that. Does anybody have a good framework that they use of when to say yes and when to say no? They want to share? Then answer this question. When do you say no? Whether it's to someone else or to yourself. When do you say no? Is anybody here good at saying no? Greg McKeown, the author of Essentialism, was at this conference that I spoke at last week, and he talked about that. He says, you know what, the thing that you have to understand is that every yes is a no, and every no is a yes. Every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. Because you can't do it all, so when you recognize the opportunity cost of saying yes, it helps you have the courage to say no. And everything you say no to, you're able to say yes to something that matters. So like when you say, and I love it because he talked about this, which is great because I love when people just speak like this. He's like, when you say no, for instance, to pornography, you're saying yes to a healthy relationship with your spouse and your wife. And with the light, when you say no to media and to screens and to games, then you're saying yes to all of these other things. And when you start to recognize that every no is a yes and every yes is a no, then now all of a sudden you get a better sense of clarity around what it means to say yes and no. And we have to be more cognizant of the yeses and the nos in our lives, because this right here, what you say yes to and no to, not only to other people, but yourself. Should I say yes to sitting down and watching that football game? I know that it's going to take 4 hours. 4 hours is a long time. Like, you just have to recognize and start to be more aware, because this right here is one of the greatest constraint of your ability to be successful in life, is your ability to recognize and know what to say yes to and what to say no to. And then having the discipline to say no when you should say no, and the discipline to say yes when you should say yes. By the way, and I can't emphasize this enough, the clearer your identity, objective, and plan, the easier it is to know if you should be saying yes or no. It's when your path forward is unclear or unplanned that the yes and the no just doesn't seem like it matters very much. You're like, yeah, I have time. Like I can do that. Because you're not compromising anything. But when you have a plan, and we're about to talk about one of the greatest ways that you can build a framework that helps you say yes or no, is when you have a plan and you know what you should be doing at every minute, and not specifically, but an allocation, then it's so much easier to know if you should be saying yes or no. But we have to be more aware of what we say yes to and what we say no to. Any questions, comments on this? Okay. Oh, we talked about the suck threshold. Here's the problem. The problem is we do this and everybody does this. We tend to use busyness as a proxy for progress. And so you find people in life who are just infinitely busy, but they're not going anywhere. But they feel like they're using their busyness as a proxy for progress. And by the way, the less clear our direction, our objective and our plan and our alignment of what is my path and how do I stay on it, when that path is unclear and we start to have like, here's what's missing, all of our rewards are missing. We're not getting value, we're not feeling the value, we're not feeling a sense of meaning, we're not feeling a sense of growth, we're not getting our sense of contribution. And this creates what's called cognitive dissonance. And when we start to feel that cognitive dissonance, it's really uncomfortable, and we tend to mitigate the cognitive dissonance with activity. We just try to go do a bunch of things. We think that, okay, if I'm busy and I'm active and I'm doing a bunch of things, then I will feel a sense of momentum and movement. But it doesn't. It's like treading water. You can tread water as fast as you want, but it's not going to get you to the other end of the pool. You're just treading water. It's good exercise, but you're not going anywhere. When our objective is clear, and our identity and our purpose and our direction and our plan, like when all of that is clear, then busyness feels like busyness. It doesn't feel like progress. Busyness only feels like progress when you don't have a plan and you don't have a destination and you're not on a journey. That's when we mistake busyness for progress. Does that make sense? Does anybody associate with that? I totally do. I still do. It's so easy to just fill your day with busyness. And then you get done and you're like, did I move the needle on anything? So, no, not yet. Don't read that. Okay. Okay. When we remove the busyness from our life, the signal goes up. All of that busyness tends to act as noise. And when we remove the busyness from our life and we say no to something that is busy, when we say no, these are my 5 critical contexts. These are the things I care about. These are the objectives, the short-term destination, the objective I want to meet for all of my critical contexts. Here is my plan of how am I going to get there. I'm going to get there. Here is my next steps for each of those objectives. Now when someone asks me to do something, or when I'm looking at all of the myriad opportunities of how to spend my time, it's so much easier for me to say no because it's signal. I have signal. It's not just noise, it's signal. But when that is unclear, then our signal to noise ratio is all out of whack, and we just are using an activity. So I want to show you this video. I love this video. I am sometimes so frustrated with Apple because of lots of reasons, but I love this Apple video, and I do buy all their products. So here's this video I want to show. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. Okay.
satisfying commercial.
It is, isn't it? Like you just want to just watch it. It's very good. I love how they talk about like what they did is they identified the sweet spot. They identified what. Oh yes, please.
Can you put this in the
I will.
resources?
Yes, I will. I'll put the YouTube link up there, and I'll actually stick the.
Goes to sleep tonight.
I know. Yes. I love it because of a lot of things. But they first of all, the creative genius of that is just so brilliant. Like it's so creative. I love it. But they identified their sweet spot. They identified the critical context. They identified the end state, which was what? Did anybody catch it? And then they said they design around that intent.
Enhancing lives.
Enhancing lives and how people feel. Like they identified, so for them, that's their objective. Like our objective is to enhance lives by how people feel. It's not about hardware and software. It's not about features and functionality. It's not about any of this. It's about how do people feel when they use our product? Does it enhance their life? Yes or no? And then they say we walk backwards and we begin to craft around our intention. So as you think back of our 4 squares, we had our square number 1, which is our first 4 elements, was, anybody remember? Ors, O, orient. So our first 4 objectives were all around orienting. It's what is our statement? What is our sweet spot? What is that tipping point? What is that? Because everything from here on out, and then they say and then we begin to craft around our intention. That's all of architect the path. That's all of what this is. It's like now that we know what we're trying to accomplish in each of our critical contexts, we're going to begin to craft our lives around that intention. And we're going to have 1,000 no's to every yes. Because we are so sold emotionally and devoted to our cause because we feel it, that the yes and the no decision becomes so much easier. Because it's an opportunity cost that we can feel because there's so much signal and so little noise. But it all focuses on our ability to have that clarity of what our purpose is and what our objectives are in each of our critical contexts. So, oh man. Okay, so there's this principle, last principle for today, I think. It's called Parkinson's Law. And this is actually a guy named Parkinson. It's something Parkinson, I can't remember. But what he realized was that work expands to fill the time allotted for it. It's the same thing as like, I read it the other day. The contents of my purse expand to fill the space inside of it. So however big my purse is, like Sarah's like, I get it. Tyson's like, I don't get it. No, it's like if you have a wallet, if it has like, if you have a bag, whatever it is, but work expands to fill the time allotted for it. So remember we talked about Pareto's law, which is the 80-20 principle. Parkinson's law is the very same thing. So it's fascinating because what you have is this, so this is time and this is effort. And it goes like this. If you have unlimited time, then you'll just put in very little effort until it's done. If you force a limitation on your time, then what will happen is you will invest high effort, but you will get it done in a tiny amount of time. This is one of the most powerful principles that they use in leadership development training and teaching managers how to optimize the performance and productivity of their teams. Because if you simply impose a deadline, it will get done by that deadline. 2 ways that it gets done is number 1, you filter out all the noise. You are like, you know what? That's not critical to this. It forces you to hone in on the 80-20. It forces you to ask, you know what, there's 20% of the work that produces 80% of the results. It forces you to focus on the 20%, the magical 20%. It also forces you It makes it so much easier to say no instead of yes, because you have a bit just the sense. So one of the problems that we have, especially with objectives, this is why I was saying we'll talk about this, because some of you have objectives that are not urgent, they're not time bound. And so one of the things that will one of the barriers that will stand in your way if you have an objective that is not time bound is that you aren't going to make any progress on it. Or that progress is going to be really, really slow. It's going to take forever. Yeah.
So should that be part of our plan? Is like,
yes,
I have to have this done by a certain date?
Yes. So that's the intent of forcing yourself to set an objective. So if the context is discipline or leadership, that's great. That's the objective, and you can even have a destination postcard of like, what am I going to look like when I am just this phenomenal leader or I am highly disciplined? But set an objective. In 1 year, what do I want discipline or leadership to look like? And then set milestones so you continue to create time-bound deliverables. As long as something has no bound to the time you can spend, our propensity as human beings is just that we won't make progress. Like work will expand to fill the time allotted for it. If I have a whole afternoon to clean the yard, it's going to take me most of the afternoon to clean it. But if it's like, holy cow, my family is coming over in an hour, guess what I'm going to do in an hour? Like, I'm going to find a way to clean the yard in an hour. This happens. It happens all over our lives. Sarah's like, I've seen this, yeah. So this is a powerful law. And by the way, as you go, I don't know if you noticed this, but I've posted 4 principles in the principle knowledge base. That's what these principles are there for. In that principle knowledge base, when you know these principles that govern behavior, like Parkinson's law, it's such a simple thing, but when you know that work expands to fill the time allotted for it, and all I have to do is create a task to make my objective time bound, and now all of a sudden I'll progress on it, like this gives you power. When you understand the principles that govern life, you have power to act in life instead of just being acted upon. When you don't know about Parkinson's law and you have an objective that is not time-bound, then you will fall into this category without you even knowing. But once you know the principle and you know the law, now you can leverage and use the law to be a person who is successful, who moves forward in life. Okay, so Parkinson's law. Okay, now we're going to talk about the big tool. Are you familiar with time boxing? Kind of. Okay, so I don't know if you know this or not. By the way, this comes from this book, which is a phenomenal book. It's called The Happiness Equation. And I'll put this, of course, online. But The Happiness Equation, I love it. It's just this guy, and he just like decided he wanted to get serious about trying to figure out what is the formula for happiness. Like, what does it take to be happy? What do I have to do? And how much of this apply? And so he created this. One of the things he found is that so many people complain about not having enough time. Well, I would be happy if I could do this, but I don't have time to do that, so I'm not happy. He said, you know, it's interesting because we have all of us have 168 hours in a week. So 24 hours a day times 7 turns out to be 168. Well, if you sleep for 8 hours a night, anybody sleep for 8 hours a night? Nope. We tend to not do that. If you did, even if you did sleep for 8 hours a night, that would be 56 hours. If you work for 8 hours a day, that would be 56 hours. If you go 56 plus 56 minus 168, what does that leave? 56. 1/3 of our life is entirely discretionary, and that's if you sleep for 8 hours. The problem is we tend to let the inertia of life take over that time. We tend to let that 56 hours, it's 1/3 of our life where I get to choose what I do. I get to choose whether I'm going to move forward in one of my critical contexts or whether I'm going to not. We all, and this is the great commonality, this is like the thing that no one, we can all say, well, they succeeded because they had more money or access to more talent or access, whatever it is, we all have, like this is the most level playing field there ever is. We all have the same amount of time. It's what we choose to do with those 56 hours the 1/3 of our life that really matters. And when we, so I posted, one of the principles I posted is the principle of scarcity. And the idea of scarcity is that scarcity tends to be the primary thing upon which we use to attribute value. It sets our perception of value. This is why, diamonds and gold and money has value, because it's a scarce resource. But it's not just money, it's not just economics. It's like, the phrase, distance makes the heart grow fonder. In other words, you impose scarcity on a relationship, and now it's also familiarity breeds contempt. When there's no scarcity in these between, then there's no perceived value. A prophet is not without honor except in his own country. It's just the principle of scarcity. So the funny thing is, we tend to see time as not scarce because we don't really allocate that time. And because we don't allocate that time and we don't have a sense of what we should be doing in that time, it's just, we come home like it's just time. And because we have no time-bound deadlines on our objectives, then there's no sense of scarcity. If you want to be someone who is more successful and who does more in life, who moves forward, then you impose scarcity on your perception of time. And one of the ways you do that is through a tool called time boxing. Come on. Okay, so here's how time boxing works. I'm going to erase some of this stuff. Don't worry, it's all going to be online. Time boxing is anybody familiar with time boxing, by the way, except Austin, who's kind of vaguely familiar? Time boxing has become one of the leading ways that organizations try to increase performance and productivity out of their teams, is they implement time boxing. So here's how time boxing works. You identify what I call your critical context. They call it, different people call it different things. But these are like the big buckets of things that where work has to be done, where stuff has to be done. So you identify, number one, your critical context. Then number two, you create a list. So has anybody read Getting Things Done? The book Getting Things Done? Familiar with that? So Getting Things Done is a bestseller book. I'll put that in there. There's a huge movement called GTD, which is just getting things done. One of his primary principles of getting things done is get it out of your head and put it on a list. Because as long as it's in your head, like you have this cognitive overhead. You have this, like some of your resources, your cognitive resources are just spent trying to remember all the stuff there is to do. But as soon as you get it out of your head and you put it down somewhere, then you free up all of those cognitive resources to actually focus on getting work done. So what you do is you create a list for each of your critical contexts. Then you do an allocation. So in other words, you say, okay, I believe that I already have a work time box, it's 8 hours, and I already have a sleep time box, which is 8 hours. But now I have this other set of hours. What am I going to do in these hours? Well, one of your identity things is I am a father, and I am a husband, and here are my critical contexts. And it's like, okay, now based on each of these contexts, I say, okay, let's say I have 4 critical contexts. And one of those could be renewal, which is what we'll talk about when we get to the renewal principle. It could be you have 4 critical contexts and then just a bucket called renewal, which is basically I want to stay sane. So you have a list for each of these that's called a backlog. and that's your list. And then you prioritize that backlog. So you have a prioritized list for each of your contexts. And then you go in and you say, okay, this context deserves, if this total time is, what was 56 hours? Then I'm going to allocate, let's say it's 10 hour, 5 hours, to this, whatever you do your, it's not going to add up to 56, but you get it. What is it, Lazy? Let's see, 5, 10, 15, 20, so that's not even close. Anyway, you do your allocation, and then you take your schedule, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You take your schedule and you schedule time boxes. Your allocation is based on, like, the beautiful thing about this allocation is it allows you to say, that feels right because I'm investing, I'm investing 5 hours a day in renewal. Anything more than that feels indulgent. Now I know I have a 5 hour a day allocation. I have a limit. I have an ability, a framework, a guide where when it's a yes or no decision, I can say yes or no. Because if I say yes, when my time allocation is used up for that, then I know that I'm sacrificing something else. So then what you do is you go into your schedule after you've done your time allocation. You go into your schedule and you say, okay, so this is Monday. I know that, this is my work slot. And by the way, you do this for your work activity as well. So you have categories at work. So you have like an email time. You have, this is when I'm going to build relationships. This is when I'm going to get work done. This is when I'm going to whatever it is. And you actually can do this on a microcosm layer where you say, these are the time slots that I have and how much time I'm going to allocate to each of them. So you start to fill in your days. And then when you get to a time box in that day, you go to the backlog, the prioritized backlog, and you just start checking off the backlog of that day. Does that make sense? Now the beautiful thing, yes?
So the list is like what you need to do during that time frame?
The list is simply, I know that in my context of whatever this is, these are all of the things that I want to get done.
Okay.
That I need to get done. And I've prioritized them, okay? So it's just a prioritized list of stuff to do in that category.
And then your allocation is just putting it in the week?
Yeah, so it's like, I know I have 10 hours a week for this allocation. So where is that going to go?
Okay.
It forces you to be disciplined about how you allocate your time. Because without discipline in how you allocate your time just washes away. Here's a fun story. When I was like 10, I was about 10, I was at this school and the teacher had told us to bring a bar of soap to school the next day because we were going to do a soap carving. Did anybody ever do a soap carving when they were in school? Am I the only one? Like, yeah, you did a soap carving, right?
I did it in Scouts, but
Scouts, okay. So you bring a bar of soap, like ivory soap, whatever it is. You bring a bar of soap, and we all sit there. And, our big time came, and I was really excited about this because I love, like, creating stuff. So we all sit down, and she's like, okay, we have, like, what she assigned our time. We had 30 minutes to do this activity, whatever. We have our butter knife, our super sharp butter knife because you can't bring a real knife to school. And our bar of soap. And she's like, okay, everybody go ahead and start. And I sat there, and I wanted my bar of soap to be beautiful. Like I wanted to create something that was amazing. And so I sat there for a long time and I was trying to envision and I was like trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to carve? And then I was planning it. And finally, once I had it, I was like, okay. And I had just started to carve and it's like the time was done. The time was done. I didn't have enough time to do it. Because I didn't know what to do in that time. And so if we are not disciplined about our time, then it just washes away like this bar. It's like time will just evaporate. It just goes. And so like one of the attributes that you have to achieve as part of discipline is the ability to be disciplined about how you allocate and invest your time. And that means you got to look at your schedule and say, okay, for this category of whatever that critical context is, I am going to say this deserves 10 hours, which means I'm going to find 10 hours in my schedule to make sure that it happens. And then when I get to that time box in my schedule, I'm going to go to my backlog for that time box, for that context, and I'm going to just start knocking these off. Okay, so here's the homework. The homework is this. Do a full barrier assessment for one of your critical contexts. If you have time, you're more than welcome to apply all of this to all of your critical contexts, but I'm more interested right now in building up the muscle. So if you want to choose one that from now on you're going to focus on, or maybe 2 or 3, whatever. So choose one critical context and do a complete barrier assessment, and then go modify your plan. Right now your plan only consists of 2 things: milestones and next steps for the first milestone. So now go look at your plan and say, okay, based on what I know I need and what I think might get in my way, how am I going to modify my plan so that I have a plan on how to move forward? All right? Okay, thanks everybody.